Hello, my crafty friends. Today I have some super fun pop-up Christmas tree cards to share with you. And I will also share a few different ways you can use the pop-up Christmas trees in your card making. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have 3 different card ideas featuring a pop-up Christmas tree. I will also give you some tips on how to use the pine tree punch to create these pop-up Christmas trees. Now, the cards in this video feature products from the Stampin' Up! Wrapped in Plaid suite. However, keep in mind that you can use this pop-up card technique with just about any shape. By the end of this video, you will have 3 adorable Christmas tree card ideas and some fun new card designs to play with. For the latest card making ideas, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on that little bell so you will be notified each time I upload a new video. Now, inquiring minds want to know, are you currently working on Christmas cards? Are you all done with your Christmas card making? Or are you just getting started? Leave me a comment below. Okay, so first let's talk about the supplies you will need to create these cards. So to create these cards, I'm using a variety of products from the Wrapped in Plaid product suite from Stampin' Up! So, of course, I'm working with some cardstock colors which coordinate with the plaid pattern papers that I'll be using. So for these cards, I am using some white, cherry cobbler, shaded spruce, and I also decided to add a bit of Crumb Cake Cardstock just for a more rustic look to the cards. Now, speaking of pattern papers, I am also using some of the beautiful plaid papers from the Wrapped in Plaid Designer Series paper pack. I will also be using the Perfectly Plaid stamp set from this suite. And probably the most important tool I need is this little pine tree punch in order to make the pop-up Christmas trees. And we will also need some ink. So for these cards, I decided to go with 2 different color inks. So I will be using shaded spruce and cherry cobbler. And to create some of the accent pieces, I'm going to be using some different die cuts. So I'm using the scallop circle from the Layering Circle die set. And then I'm also using the Stitched Shapes die. And the last couple things, just a bit of linen thread to do some embellishing and some metallic pearls. Okay, I think that's it. Let's get started. Okay, so first let's talk about how to create the little pop-up Christmas tree. So you will need a tree-shaped die or a punch, of course, to create the little Christmas tree. So for these cards, I'm using the pine tree punch, which is part of the Wrapped in Plaid suite from Stampin' Up! So to create the pop-up Christmas tree, you will need to punch out 3 tree shapes. So we will be adhering the tree shapes together to create the pop-up section. Now, if you plan to use the pine tree punch, I have a couple little tips for you on creating the pop-up section. So the interesting thing about the pine tree punch is that it's asymmetrical. So that means the left side of the tree is slightly different than the right side. So you can't just punch out these 3 shapes and adhere them together because the edges won't match up. So here's the little tip for you. To create the pop-up Christmas trees with this particular punch, you will need to punch out 2 shapes from the plaid side of the pattern paper. And then you're going to flip the paper over and punch out 1 tree shape from the other side. So this will give you a mirror image of the tree, which is important if you want to adhere the edges together and have them line up, which is exactly what we want to do when we're creating the pop-up Christmas tree. So the other trees will be adhered to each side of this one. That's why you need a mirror image. So this will make more sense as I put this pop-up Christmas tree together. So we're going to start by scoring each of the tree shapes directly down the middle. We will be folding them all in half, and then we will adhere the halves together. So add some adhesive to the back of the tree that you punched out last. So this is the tree that you punched out from the other side of the plaid paper. This is the tree that will make up the middle section of our pop-up Christmas tree. Okay, now grab one of the other folded trees and adhere it to one of the halves of that middle tree, that tree that has the adhesive on it. Then grab the other one and adhere it to the other half. So basically we've created an accordion folded tree that will pop up on the card. Okay, now that you know how to create the pop-up section of the card, let's go ahead and make some cards. This first card features the pop-up Christmas tree on the front of the card. It makes an awesome little embellishment. So we're going to start with a piece of cherry cobbler cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 4.25 inches to create the base of the card. Next, cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock. We will be decorating this piece of cardstock before adhering it to the card front. Cut a 1.5 by 4 inch piece of one of the plaid pattern papers. Adhere to the bottom of the white cardstock. Next, cut a 1/2 inch by 4 inch piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock and adhere it to the top of the plaid paper so that it slightly overlaps that piece. Wrap a bit of linen thread around the entire piece of white cardstock so that it overlaps onto the crumb cake piece. Then tie the linen thread into a little bow and trim off the excess. Now go ahead and adhere the entire piece of white cardstock to the cherry cobbler card front. Next, cut out a 2.5 inch circle from a piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock using one of the stitched shapes dies, or you could use a punch. And then adhere to the upper part of the card front with a few dimensionals. Okay, now create one of the pop-up Christmas trees just like I shared at the beginning of the video using 3 pine tree shapes. Adhere the pop-up Christmas tree to the center of the circle shape. Stamp a greeting on a 1/2 inch wide piece of white cardstock. Snip the ends into a little banner and adhere it to the card front with a few dimensionals. Then for the finishing touch, simply embellish the card with a few metallic pearls. Okay, but don't forget to decorate the inside of the card. So to decorate the inside, start with a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock. Punch out another pine tree shape from a piece of the plaid paper and adhere it to the top part of the white cardstock. Then stamp a sentiment under the tree. Then go ahead and adhere the entire piece of white cardstock to the inside of your card. And there you go. You have a fun pop-up Christmas tree on the front of the card and a coordinating tree on the inside of the card. Now, the cool thing about the pop-up Christmas tree is that it will lay flat for mailing. Okay, the second card design I want to share features a little pop-up Christmas tree that is actually on the inside of the card, yet it is visible on the front of the card when the card is closed. So we are basically going to create a little window on the card front for the Christmas tree to pop through. So start with a piece of shaded spruce cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 4.25 inches to create the base of your card. Grab one of your scalloped circle dies that measures approximately 2 3/4 inches in diameter. Lay it on the shaded spruce card front and cut out the shape. We will not be using the scalloped circle shape on this card, but you could certainly use it to create other cards, so hang on to it. Okay, now that we have created a scalloped circle window on the front of the card, let's decorate it. So we're going to start by decorating the inside of the card first. So cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock and adhere it to the inside of the card. Now close the card so you can see the white cardstock peeking through to the front of the card. Cut out a 2.5 inch circle from a piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock using one of the stitched shapes dies or a punch and adhere it in the center of the scalloped circle shape on the white cardstock. Now create one of the pop-up Christmas trees just like I shared at the beginning of the video using 3 pine tree shapes and adhere it to the center of the circle shape. So there you go. Now you have a window card with a little pop-up Christmas tree in it. Super fun. Okay, so let's finish decorating it. Cut a 1.5 by 4.25 inch piece of one of the plaid pattern papers and adhere it across the bottom of the card front. Next, cut a 1/2 by 4.25 inch piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock and adhere it to the top of the plaid paper so that it's slightly overlapping that piece. Stamp a greeting on a 1/2 inch wide piece of white cardstock. Snip the ends into a banner and adhere it to the card front with a few dimensionals. For the finishing touch, embellish the card front with a few metallic pearls. Now don't forget to stamp a sentiment on the inside of the card. And there you go, another fun little card featuring a pop-up Christmas tree. Now this last card idea I have to share with you features the little pop-up Christmas tree on the inside of the card. It's a fun little surprise that is sure to wow your family and friends. So start with a piece of cherry cobbler cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 4.25 inches to create the base of the card. Next, cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock. We will be decorating this piece of cardstock before adhering it to the card front. Cut a 1 by 5 inch piece of one of the polka dot pattern papers and adhere it to the left side of the Crumb Cake Cardstock. Next, cut a 2 3/4 by 5 inch piece of one of the plaid pattern papers. Adhere it next to the polka dot pattern paper on the Crumb Cake Cardstock. Wrap a bit of linen thread around the entire piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock so that it overlaps onto the seam where the two pattern papers meet. Then tie the linen thread into a little bow and trim off the excess. Adhere the entire piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock to your cherry cobbler card front. Next, cut out a 2.5 inch circle from a piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock using one of the stitch shapes dies or a punch and adhere it to the center of the card with a few dimensionals. Next, punch out a tree shape, just one, from a piece of the plaid pattern paper and adhere it to the crumb cake circle using a few dimensionals. Okay, now let's decorate the inside of the card and create the pop-up section. So cut 2 pieces of one of the plaid pattern papers at 5.5 by 1 inch. Adhere one to the left side of the card and one to the right side of the card. Line up the edge of the pattern paper with the edges of the card. Cut 1 piece of Crumb Cake Cardstock at 2 by 5.5 inches. Adhere it to the right side of the card next to the pattern paper piece. Stamp a Christmas sentiment on the crumb cake piece using some shaded spruce ink. All right, let's create the pop-up section. So again, create one of the pop-up Christmas trees just like I shared at the beginning of the video. Use 3 pine tree shapes to create it. Adhere the pop-up Christmas tree to the center of the inside of the card base. Now be sure to line up the score line on the pop-up Christmas tree with the score line on the middle of the card base. Then the Christmas tree will accordion fold inside the card when the card is closed, and it will pop up when the card is opened. Pretty cool, hey? Now you have 3 fun pop-up Christmas tree card ideas and some fun new card designs that you can use this holiday season. And if you enjoyed these cards, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have fun getting creative, take care, and I'll see you soon.